Um, well, hello, fellow panelists, first and foremost. Glad we all made it back together again. And hello, real room from the virtual space here. I guess we are the last thing standing between you and your lunch, I believe. So we have a bit of time. Actually, our hosts were generous enough to give us up to an hour, if we want, to talk deep on the topic of community data, measuring trends and conditions in at the local level. So I'm going to actually walk through it. Just a short introduction before I of the program, the community data program, before I hand over to our three panelists and give a short introduction for the three of them. So if we are all ready, shall we proceed? Right. So everybody on this call today has a connection to the community data program, which was created in its current form, I guess, almost 15 years ago now, through the Canadian Council on Social Development. We've been hosted by the Canadian Community Economic Development Network now for almost 5 years. The origins of the program were about bringing municipalities together, really at the time to save money, because data was much more expensive because of licensing restrictions 15 years ago. But it was all about tracking local trends and conditions, especially around social development issues of poverty, affordability, less so at the time, really about poverty was the core issue, at the sub-provincial, municipal and neighborhood levels. Our job was to work with credible data providers. Statistics Canada, of course, is well known, but there are others, and bring data to these organizations. We are a membership-based initiative. Our members are organizations, and we work with our members to define our priorities, and the priorities all revolve around data. And our job is to make it as clear, affordable, accessible as possible. And we do that through a range of ways. So as a program, we're all about getting access to small area data that allows you to measure current and trends about your communities. But we also help build capacity through training and learning events. And we connect practitioners across the country. We very much work with the non-academic world, but as you'll find out from at least one of our panelists, we certainly connect with the post-secondary world as well. But our focus is on people working in municipal governments, public sector organizations, and in community sector organizations. The ones we work with, including those embedded in universities, have very much a connection to the local. So we're very much about the local. I mentioned our members. They're organizations, so we have about 400 plus member organizations. There are individuals attached to each organization that are registered and they access our data. So we have about 2,400 of those. And then we structure our members into what we call community data consortia. I won't go into much detail on that during this presentation, but just to say a typical consortium boundary would be a municipality. Certainly it's typically smaller than a province. It can be a province in some cases, but the idea is to build relationships at a local level across a region and have an excuse to get together, maybe because you're sharing the cost of data, but it's all working towards a common objectives around local development. So we have the 400 member organizations structured into 30 community data consortia across the country. And we are very present in central Canada, the west, and the far west, the BC and the east, and less so in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which has a very strong rural dimension, particularly Saskatchewan. And that is one of the reasons we thought we'd come to this event, is have a better connection with rural communities. And then Quebec, which ironically is where our host organization is based, also has a limited number of, well, no consortia at the moment. So that is our reach across the country. And we do have some exclusions to who cannot be a member, but very much the focus is on organizations with a local service delivery mandate. And so quite a range of types of organizations operating locally. I mean, the major exclusion is if you're a national organization, well, we can develop a partnership, but you're not going to be a member of a local community data consortium. And our focus, of course, is on data, but data for the whole country. So if we get a question from a member in New Brunswick, then we will answer that question with some data we'll buy for the entire country at the smallest geographies possible. So that's an important feature of the program. We don't just get data for a given community, we get it for the whole country. And that's in part because it's cheaper to buy data for the whole country, but also because the questions coming out of a rural New Brunswick are often very similar to what's happening in other parts of the country. There's a certain commonality to themes at a local level. Of course, there's variations that are significant, but at its root, local development and local priorities, there's a certain commonality from a data point of view. As we'll hear today, we also do some customized geographies, not just small area geographies, but customized ones as well. And then we make the data available in a range of formats, some more exotic than others, which is why we provide training and learning in order to use some of these tools. And then we have data that cover a wide range of topics that all converge around the local, but these are just some examples of data sets that we've acquired and produced in the form of infographics and dashboards that speak more explicitly to a smaller community focus. So, for example, public transit is the classic one that relates well if you're living in a big city, but is not that meaningful as a form of transportation in a community of 5,000 or 400. But transportation and commuting are obviously important topics. So these are some of the data products that we've been acquiring that are more relevant to a rural community setting generally, and workforce development in particular, which is one topic that of focus over the last year or so. So I'm just going to introduce, that's it for the program. That's just a quick overview of the program. Just want to get us into your hands quickly. So we're going to start as an opener with William Dunstan, who I think you just spoke with yesterday, maybe, or as earlier today. So William is with the Northern Policy Institute, and the Northern Policy Institute heads up our Northern Ontario Community Data Consortium, which, as we learned a few weeks ago, is geographically the largest one in Canada. That's courtesy your director, William. He did the math on that. So William's going to talk about how members of the Northern Ontario Data Consortium make use of data through the program and through other sources. And then Rachel Lewis is here with us as well from the city of Kawartha Lakes. And the city helps lead up the Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton Community Data Consortium. And Rachel's going to talk a bit about the whole notion of custom geographies and what that means. And I guess also about consortium building and how custom geographies, I guess, are part of building relationships at the local level. And lastly, Jayme Jones, Selkirk College, in what we call the Columbia Basin Boundary Community Data Consortium, but what they call the Columbia Basin Boundary Community Data Consortium. And Jayme is going to talk about a particular initiative, State of the Basin, the data initiative, and a good example of how you use community data and other data inputs to create a data product. And then time permitting, I'm going to call on my colleague who's with us, Mike Deiter, who is our data specialist, who's been working with us for years, who knows more about the catalog than anyone else, maybe to provide a bit of a reaction after we've heard from all three of you. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point and hand over to William.
Thanks for that introduction, Michel. I'll just get this set up. Okay, if that's all looking good, I'll get started. So yeah, as Michel explained, I'll be talking to you about how our members in Northern Ontario use data, specifically CDP data. And really my focus in this presentation is talking about how small members and small organizations are able to use data. Sometimes when we're telling people about CDP for the first time, there's a perception or a worry that this won't be useful to communities that don't have a data expert on staff or a ton of data capacity. And really that's not necessary. It's certainly advantageous if you have additional capacity, but it's certainly not required to get value out of this program. So to give a bit of an introduction on the Northern Ontario Data Consortium, we currently have 18 member organizations, and they come from a variety of sectors. They include workforce planning boards, economic development organizations, public health units, small municipalities, and by that we mean municipalities as small as 4,000 residents. There are regional immigration coordinators, there's community nonprofits, and there's many more. One important commonality between most of these member organizations is they don't have staff who would be considered data experts. Typically, what is the case is they'll have a small number of staff, as you'd expect for a small organization, and they have one or two people who work with data or do a little bit of research as part of the many hats that they wear in a small organization. But really, they don't, most of our members do not have someone whose full job is research and data analysis. Nevertheless, all these organizations are able to get value out of CDP data. And generally, we find our members are using CDP data in two ways. The first is to just learn new things about their community, as you probably all know. You can use data to learn how your community is doing, what opportunities exist, what challenges exist. The other thing our members like to use community data for is communicating facts about their community. When I've at the sessions I've attended at this conference, a recurrent theme seems to be that, well, there's the first step of doing research and understanding rural communities, but then there's the second step of explaining what you found and what the realities are to people outside of rural areas, whether that's to governments, whether that's to funders, whether that's to people looking to move to the community. So it's important to recognize that for our members, it's really valuable to use data in that way. They use data they access on their website to show off, you know, good facts about their community. They use it when they're submitting funding applications. They use it when they're speaking to higher levels of government to communicate the realities in their region. So now I'm just going to give you a few quick examples of data products that our partners in Northern Ontario, our members in Northern Ontario use and how they use them. The most popular product, and there are many, many products in the community data program, the most popular one among our members in Northern Ontario are the target group profiles. So these are essentially a census profile for a specific group. If you don't know what a census profile is, it's essentially after every census, the Statistics Canada publishes a profile for each community in Canada that's made available for free online. And there's key statistics about population, age, language, economic variables, and a host of other things. Through the TGPs, um, members are able to get access to that census profile, but for a specific demographic or specific group in their community. So that could be for francophones, for the indigenous identity population, for immigrants, for people with activity limitations, and there's many other ones. That the list I have here is certainly not exhaustive. One really popular TGP in Northern Ontario is the francophone TGP. We have many communities with sizable francophone populations or organizations that serve francophones. What I have on this slide is an example from one Northern Ontario community of some insights you can get from the francophone TGP. This is looking at Timmins, which is one of the larger communities in Northern Ontario, but I'll use a few examples a bit later of smaller communities. All of this data is available for any community again. So one thing you would see in Timmins from having access to the francophone target group profile is that you can see that there's an Asian population among francophones. The average age is higher, and children also make up a smaller share of the population. So an example of how a member would use that is we have a member who is deeply involved in francophone immigration. So when they're trying to get funding for their projects or trying to communicate to the government the importance of francophone immigration, they can point to this data and say, look, in Timmins, we can see the francophone population is getting older. It's shrinking. And so francophone immigration is an important priority for maintaining that demographic weight. And there's also other data on economic variables, for example. You can see in Timmins that among francophones, the unemployment rate is slightly lower, but so is the median annual after-tax household income. I'll give one more example of how target group profiles are being used in Northern Ontario. Right now in Northern Ontario, a really big topic of discussion among municipalities, post-secondary institutes, and various groups involved in public policy is the is the question of non-permanent residents and their impact on the economy and in a number of other ways in Northern Ontario. So when we say non-permanent residents, that's generally temporary foreign workers and international students. through the target group profiles, there's a target group profile for immigrants, and within that, there's a subcategory for non-permanent residents. So our members have appreciated having access to the target group profile for this because it gives them data specifically about that non-permanent resident population that they can't easily get elsewhere. So here's a table that we'd thrown together with a member for something were looking at that looks at the percent of workers employed in certain industries in Northern Ontario in 2021, but it breaks it down between non-permanent residents and the average for the total population. So what this is showing is that some industries like agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, and mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction, non-permanent residents are underrepresented in those fields. Then you have something like professional, scientific, and technical services, where it's a very similar number. And then finally, you'll see in retail trade and accommodation and food services, non-permanent residents are hugely overrepresented. And this is something that points back to what I was mentioning earlier of both using data to identify facts about your community and using data to communicate facts that you often already know. No community in Northern Ontario no community leader or no member in Northern Ontario is ever surprised to learn that non-permanent residents are overrepresented in retail trade and accommodation and food services. It's something they can see in their community, but having access to this data gives them evidence for when they're speaking to people about the reality in their community, speaking to governments about the importance of non-permanent residents to certain industries. So that's how that data can be valuable to them. So looking at, I guess, another data product and also another way members engage with data, a lot of our members just pull statistics from the community data program, and they use it to inform their reports, to inform their funding applications or whatever activities they're doing. But we have some members who go a step further and use CDP data to do their own calculations and analytics. And again, in this example, this is something that's done by small organizations. There are certainly some larger organizations with data experts who do more complex things, but this is an example of information and insights that a small organization is able to get. So one example of a member using CDP data to do their own calculations is using some of the data that's available on employment by occupation for various age groups to identify occupations that are at risk of large-scale retirements. And by doing that, you're able to see which occupations are likely or possible to have labor shortages within the next decade, and that can be used for workforce planning, for economic development priorities, to fill those potential labor gaps in the future. I do know that one organization that does this is again, a very small organization. They're a workforce planning board with, I think, 2 permanent employees. And again, this data work is really not their primary focus. It's something they do combined with dozens of other tasks that someone heading up a small rural organization is often tasked with. So just to run quickly through what this calculation they do is essentially they're looking at the working age population in 2021, subtracting the people aged 55 to 64 who are likely to retire, and adding people aged 15 to 24 who are likely to be entering the workforce full time in the next decade. By doing that, they can get an estimate of how many working age people they'll have in 2031. These are rough estimates, and there's a few assumptions involved, but it is a useful calculation for gauging potential occupations of risk. And what you're able to get from this information is, in this example, we can see that carpenters and social and community service workers, there's a high risk of a future labor shortage in Kapuskasing. So our member now knows that these are occupations that the community needs to look into, whether that's training more people locally, encouraging people in these occupations to come to the community. It's useful information that they have for community planning. And again, CDP is the most affordable way for members to get this data, to get data that's this detailed in the first place, to get this occupation by age for narrow occupations, and also to get it for a small community like Kapuskasing that only has 7,000 people. Yeah, and that brings me to the end of my section of the presentation. Hopefully that gave you a better idea as to how small organizations with relatively limited data capacity are able to use the community data program to advance community priorities.
Okay, thanks. So we can take a question or two as we go, but otherwise we can just run through our three presentations and then just have a discussion at the very end. So I'm not seeing any questions in the room.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's no
there is a
questions
question.
online yet, but if you do have a question, you can just put your hand up at any time. Unless you want to just wait until the end, it's kind of up to you.
Oh, unless they're burning questions, I guess we can.
Yeah, I
People can
think we
ask
can
anytime.
wait. Yeah, and if they ask in the chat, we can also respond in the chat.
Sounds
Okay.
like a plan.
All right. I will get this set up here.
Yeah, so as Rachel sets up, so again, so Rachel Lewis going to talk with about this concept of custom geographies, which is a significant part of what the program offers and is very well received.
Okay. Oh. Sorry, having a little difficulty with Zoom here. Sorry, it's not liking me sharing my screen. Try this again. Okay, can we see my screen? All right. Okay, so yeah, as Michelle said, I will be focusing on custom geographies and as a rural municipality and how we access that through the CDP. All right, so just a little bit about our local consortium. We have about 12 members. Actually, I think it might be 13. We just signed on a new one. And many are non-for-profit community agencies committed to making data-informed decisions and service planning. Less than half of the participating agencies have a data analyst on staff or any kind of capacity to work with data. So just like William was talking about, many of the organizations are experts in working with data, so CDP really makes it accessible to them to access data for their work. Some of the reasons our members access data include to make data-informed decisions for service and program planning, just general demographics of the community, or data to support grant proposals. Here at the City of Kawartha Lakes, I'm in the Human Services Department. We are the service system manager for the social services and housing for both the City of Kawartha Lakes and County of Haliburton. And one thing that we discuss at our local data consortium is geography and the level of geography and how we all kind of work in our own geographies as individual organizations.
Rachel, can I interrupt for a second? If
Sure.
you're intending to advance your slides, we're still seeing the cover slide.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Oh, I was on a second slide. Hold on. Can you see it now?
And as a default, I can share my screen and you can just tell me when to.
Yeah, that might be better because it's not. Yeah, sorry. It's not liking when I share it for some reason. Yeah, I was on the second slide there. Sorry.
Okay, let me go.
There we go.
So hopefully it behaves for me. So you were here?
Yes, that's where I was showing our member organizations. So yeah, as a consortium, we often talk about geography and how we all work within our own geographies. Like school boards have their own thing, the health unit, our workforce development board, and so on. So as the human services department, we try to come up with a geography that might work for all organizations, for a sub-municipal level, for City of Kawartha Lakes in particular. Yeah, so next slide. So when we talk about geography and the importance of selecting the appropriate geography for data reporting, we did initially look at our City of Kawartha Lakes wards, our electoral wards. However, these have some limitations for data analysis, as often lots are split in half, or they don't follow road center lines. They're not really made for data analysis. And a big one for us is that the postal codes do not align to each of those individual wards. As some of the data that we work with, such as the early development instrument, the only kind of spatial indicator is postal code. So it's really important that we have postal codes aligned to our geographies. And just a little bit more about City of Kawartha Lakes. Despite the name city in our official title, we Kawartha Lakes is the second largest single tier municipality in Ontario by land area, but we have a mainly rural population. And then the County of Haliburton, which we also have as part of our data consortium and the work in this department, is a 2-tier with 4 municipalities. And both together cover a large land area with a low population. And yeah, sorry, just looking at my notes here now that my slides are messed up, but that's okay. Yeah, okay, I think I made all my points on that one. Next one, please. All right, so what we did come up with, which we're calling our service manager geography here, is we came up with 8 areas that are made up of individual census dissemination areas, which is the smallest geographic area available for across the entire country through Statistics Canada. And as I mentioned earlier, we work with data from the early development instrument, which is a measure of childhood development. And we wanted to ensure that we had at least 100 responses per area for that data that we collect. So we created these 8 areas or neighborhoods, as we refer to them, and they align with the dissemination areas in both the City of Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton. And this is something that we're able to access as a custom geography through CDP. And although postal codes don't align perfectly, the CDP also provides us with a postal code conversion file that finds the best match for postal codes for each of the dissemination areas within our neighborhood. So we're able to easily put any of our data that has postal codes aligned with it and able to analyze it spatially. And so, yeah, these 8 areas. So we kind of split the County of Haliburton into 2 areas, and then Kawartha Lakes into 6. And we have these 3-digit acronyms here. So we have like NWK just means Northwest Kawarthas, and NEK is Northeast Kawarthas, which contains like Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls. So they all kind of have their population centers, as we might call them, within them. Okay, next slide. So prior to understanding how custom geographies work through CDP, we used to manually calculate all of the census data for our 8 neighborhoods. So this included individually downloading each of the DA census profiles, putting them together in Excel, and calculating each of the census variables. So this was very time consuming, influenced by data suppression and rounding at that happens at the DA level, and we did not have medians. So the kind of screenshot in the forefront there shows the lovely data that we get from CDP that just comes already all summarized into each of our 8 areas. and that's available for most of the census data and the target group profiles that William was referring to before as well. So saves us a lot of time. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so just custom geographies in general through CDP. Like I said, so it's offered through Statistics Canada data, and some other member organizations aside from us, they might want their electoral wards as their custom geography. So they're able to submit a geocoded map to be able to have that data customized to their local geographies that they're looking for. And it's a useful way to communicate data in a way that we organize ourselves socially. So in some other areas where there might be no neighborhoods, you could submit that as well. Some benefits is that it saves us time. As we said, we no longer have to manually calculate all this data, mitigates the suppression and rounding effects that happen with DAs, and we now have medians for all those neighborhoods. So next slide. And then, so this was just an example as well of because many of our organizations do not have a data analyst, they often come to myself for assistance when they're putting together grant proposals or applications, such as for this organization that came to me, they wanted to submit an application to create a youth wellness hub. So they were really interested in data specific to the youth population. And one of our favorite data products from CDP is the target group profile by age groups, which not only gives us the census profile by various age groups, but also gives it to us in our custom geographies. So the definition for youth can vary depending on which organization you're talking to, but in particular, this one was interested in the 13 to 24 age range, which was included in the age group TGP. So I was able to quickly put together some data for them, such as the percentage of youth population in low income. And we can see one of our neighborhoods there, which is the eastern side of Lindsay, has quite a high percentage of youth in low income. So that might be where they consider to locate their potential new youth wellness hub. So, and then we'll be using this kind of data in other projects. We're currently working on our 5-year children's services plan and working on childcare expansion, where we look at each of these neighborhoods to determine where our childcare locations should be expanding to. And I just got the data for our early development instrument, so I'll be working with that as well. So I think my next slide is just the end. So thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we made it work.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'm glad I had, it looks like roughly the same version you were hoping to see. I take it. So as we shift to our third presenter, Jayme Jones, again, any burning questions in the audience, happy to take it during this transition. Jayme's actually, you're a good example of how we do work with post-secondary institutions, Selkirk College being one of them. And in terms of the substance of your presentation, it'll be a good example of how you can draw on the community data, program data, but obviously other sources as well. And that's the typical model is we expect our members to rely on our data to some extent, but not by no means exclusively. So I will hand over to you and let's learn about the State of the Basin report.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. And it's so great hearing how others use the data too. I'm like, ooh, that's a good idea. So it's always great. And it's part of the benefit of CDP is getting ideas from others working with data. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the State of the Basin. I'm going to start with a little bit about the project. So our project was started in 2008. It was through an organization called the Columbia Basin Trust, which brings environmental, social, and economic benefits to our region. And so Selkirk College had partnered with them to do the research on the State of the Basin, looking at indicators of well-being. And then we have been leading that research since 2011. And so that's a map of our region there. And so Our region is 26,000 square kilometers, so we're very rural in the corner of the southeast corner of the province. We have 28 municipalities, 25 electoral areas, and 167,000 residents. And so what we do is the goal of this project is to provide access to data that all the organizations in our region can use to support evidence-based decision-making, leading to improved well-being. And so we want to be able to explore the lowest level of geography as possible to help the different communities or electoral areas in whatever specific data questions they're looking at. So the objectives of our project is to inform decision-making, and that's across environmental, social, and economic indicators. It's to encourage understanding on complex issues over time. So we look at trends, we look at future projections where possible, and to signal whether conditions are similar or different, either within the region or beyond, and to motivate discussion and information sharing. And so to do that, we have over 60, probably like 70 indicators of well-being across these different areas. So we have 16 sub-themes within each of these. And through that, we have quite a few different products that we produce. One is the website, which actually all the others below are nested within, but we have what we call our main website indicators, and I'll give you a tour of what that looks like in a moment. Then we also have community profiles where we focus on each of those municipalities and those electoral areas where we can dive deeper into what it looks like for those communities. We do subjective well-being research once every 2 years. We also produce once a year a snapshot report. So we pull various indicators from across all the different research themes and provide them in a really easy to understand, digestible visual format, making our research really accessible for diverse audiences. We do some trends analysis occasionally, and we do a monthly newsletter where we focus on multiple indicators of interest. So as I mentioned, our main product is our website, which is stateofthebasin.ca, and I'll navigate there in a moment to show you what that looks like. But we do look at, what does this indicator look like, or what does it measure, and why is it important to our region? What are some trends and current conditions? Just switching to a different screen here, I will show you. Let's get this. Bear with me while I just get it up here. There we go. Move my Zoom window so I can actually see. Actually, I think I'm okay. So this is what the website looks like. On this side of the website, we have all our indicators of well-being, which we look at for the whole region, or we'll break it into the different communities within the region as well. And so these are all our different sub-themes. All the reports that I mentioned earlier are all found here. So our snapshot report for each year, subjective well-being, our community profiles. But one I just wanted to show you is I thought what's really interesting, and one of the key ones where we use the CDP data is income. So I thought I'd use this one as a good example. So here for our region, making the data really accessible for any reader, whether it's a nonprofit organization or an interested resident. This information helps explain, where the data come from, why it's important, and then what are the trends and current conditions. And so here we've used data that we've received from CDP, and we've been able to show income at our municipality level for the last two census years. Or sorry, this wasn't for census years. This is just for tax filer data is where we got this one from. And this is for our rural electoral areas. And we've even broken it down into looking at it by gender from a regional district. So we choose to represent from different levels of geography depending on the specific indicator. Just go back to minimize this. There we go. So that's our website, and just try, there we go. And so our community profiles, as I mentioned, we have that for all of our 53 census subdivisions. So either our municipalities or electoral areas, and we'll provide data specific to them. So you can either go to the main indicator, which is represented, the data is showing for the region and sometimes by the census subdivision as well, or they can go straight to the community profile, which is all the data specific to their region. And we also, in some indicators, show the different levels of geography, like how the community is compared to the regional district that they're within, and then looking at BC, for example, so they can have some comparative data. So what are the benefits to the region for this type of research projects that we do? Well, it makes data accessible for our various stakeholders within the region. And it helps organizations and communities that have that limited capacity to find the data themselves. And I was actually just looking at our data for our website for the last fiscal year, and we had 21,000 visits to the website over the last year. So it's widely used within our region. It provides a really good starting point for folks. Within each indicator, we have a very detailed reference list. And so if our users are curious to explore something more, they can do that. They can also reach out to us to learn more. And it does communicate data in various ways to serve a diverse audience. So just some examples of how folks within our region use our data. So for example, in local government, we had a question come to us where they were wanting to know the age structure of the population to help guide decisions around healthcare spending. Non-governmental organizations, one example is around poverty reduction work and looking at all the low income data that is available. We've been starting to do a fair bit of work on sector profiles on different industries. And I know for folks that are in person, Sarah Breen, my colleague, has been doing a lot of that work supporting different organizations in our region with sector profiles using state of the basin and data that we get from the community data program. And then economic development practitioners can use it to help inform looking at income and workforce characteristics to inform their economic development planning. So how do we use the community data program in our context? So we're kind of different in the sense from the examples you heard earlier, where we're the ones doing the analysis. We're preparing the data so that the end product is usable for folks to just go find the data and use it for our various municipalities or organizations. And so we do a lot of that ourselves. We do have a consortium of 10 members at the moment where they're diving deeper into the data, but we're doing most of the data handling and interpretation for folks. And so for me, how we use it is really to source the data sets for that lowest level of geography possible. And this is, very important to us and a key part of how we use the CDP. I tend to go to tax file data sets a lot. I just gave a few examples here, such as for our income indicator, our low income measure indicator, charitable donations. It's very helpful. We also are starting to use it now where we would have purchased data on our own originally. Like we had been purchasing our own labor force survey data. And the benefit of the consortium is that's already happening. And so we can work with the folks at CDP, Mike and Michel, to say, hey, can we add this little, bit of information from the labor force survey that we're interested in? And so now we're starting to go to CDP as our first place when we're looking for data. It has been really good to have a custom geography for the Columbia Basin boundary region. Mostly we present the data for the communities within our boundary, but it's so nice now to have that cookie cutter of the whole basin to say, this is what it is for our region. And we have been adding it up ourselves in a lot of cases, you know, doing all the different pieces and components as best as we can. But as Rachel mentioned, it's really helpful for certain data sets where you can't do that, of adding all the different pieces together, such as a median. So it's so nice, and it's quicker now with certain pieces to have that cookie cutter for the region. And also, and last but not least, I think it's so great to have, especially Mike, if I ever have any data questions on anything or it doesn't make sense, Mike, can you please explain this to me? And he's been such a help in helping navigate some of the complexities within the data. And that is it for me. So I will stop share. Thank you.
So those are our three main presentations. There was a bit of a Q&A going, and I thought I'm going to turn to Mike for a second to provide a more in-depth answer to that. Otherwise, we were going to take any more questions from the room. We have about little under 15 minutes. I think we were told we have till 10 past. We can end a couple minutes early if everyone wants to get out of here. That's fine with us too. But why don't I just start by turning to Mike. Mike, you wanted to fill in the details. Actually, I'd asked a follow-up question on the one about not being able to measure in small communities, which is just to give an example or two of the types of topics that were being measured. That might be good to know, but if you wanted to take it from here.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't want to give, I mean, I'm hesitant to try to set some threshold for which you can definitely expect to get data or not get data. But just a note that people are often surprised at the size of communities for which you can get data out of the census, out of StatsCan. You know, just you threw. So Gord, I guess you are from Teslin, so I just quickly went and grabbed some data for Teslin. So this is like the target group profile that by age that was being referred to before. So I know you were saying that the community is about 450. This may just be Teslin, city, which, you know, it has as a population of 235 in 2021. So you are getting some information on age split. I mean, this is everything that comes out of the census profile. But here you can see for sure that you get into income data, things are a lot more sensitive there. So, and if you're starting to cut income data by age, then you're going to get into a level where data are being suppressed. But there is, if I go to you know, some of the 100%, I mean, this is 25% sample because everything in target group profiles is from the long form database, but this is from the short form questionnaire, and you can see you can start to get some information on on language. You know, looking at the labor force population in Teslin separated by industry group and class of worker or age, you certainly can get some information out of it. This is looking at, you can get some split by industry classification, type of worker, employed or unemployed. I mean, I have to scroll looking for it over to the right there. I don't want to necessarily do that right now, but for some things there definitely isn't when you get into that size, like core housing need. You know, income comes into there, so maybe a little bit less, but you definitely can get data for a population of your size. Certainly tax filer data, we're looking here at low income, or this is just the summary table for Teslin low income data. This is, if you get into low income, you see a lot more suppression, but you're still getting a count. You can see that, the rounded count of individuals in low income in Tesla counts for 20, about 8% of the population. You can't split it out by type of family in there, but you are getting information like the average low income gap ratio. So how deep in low income are some of the residents. So you will find some suppression issues, but at a high level, and I don't even know if you would count this as high level, looking at population like demographic split, certain income characteristics. For a small community, you can still get something. Certainly, if you're looking at a population of higher, up to 1,000, there's in many cases a lot of the same data that you'll find in larger cities. Then if you get in,
I'll just hop in, Mike, and add something because we kind of have some experience with that in our region.
yeah,
One of our municipalities has a population of under 200. And yet, for the most part, where there's data available for municipalities, we can get it for that municipality the same as a population of 10,000. Where we run into issues is with some of our Indigenous communities. Quite often, almost most cases, they're suppressed.
yeah.
But our municipality is usually okay. It's more sometimes where we just have to be cautious with the data, and we'll have to note just some potential caution around using the data, but it is available.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jayme. That's a great example. I mean, this, this is the Canadian Business Counts data, which is an administrative data source, so it's less susceptible to dealing with suppression. But looking at Teslin, you can get an idea of the breakout of the number of businesses by industry classification according to business size, and you can see that there is data available. So it's the main point here is essentially to say that it can be surprising the size of the community for which you can find data. Another thing I just wanted to comment about the presentations that were given, which aligns with one of the strategic directions of the program is capacity building, and that's something that we are trying to focus on more and more in the program, making sure that our members, many of whom are not data experts, many of whom research analysis is not the main thrust of what they're doing this off the side of their desk, are able to use the data. And that can be through questions directly to me. We produce a series of infographics and dashboards that have the data sort of processed already and in a visualized format where you really only need to find the name of your community in order to get a series of indicators that can easily be cut and pasted into a report for council for a funding application. But we are also finding a lot of examples amongst consortia of the lead serving as a type of hub, information hub for the other communities in their consortium, which can greatly increase capacity locally. We're happy to do it ourselves, but we definitely can't replace these type of local interactions that are happening across the country. So I hope I answered, gave some useful information toward Gord's question. Certainly there is some suppression at that level. You can't cut the data as many ways as you can in large communities, but I wouldn't say that it's irrelevant. You can still get a fair bit of data from the census. And then administrative data sources, certainly, like Canadian Business Counts, tax filer data, everyone has to file their taxes. And really you're only dealing with sort of the more stringent income suppression rules that that Statistics Canada applies, but you still find that the high level indicators will give something for your community.
So we have just a couple of minutes left. So why don't I thank the three panelists plus Mike. So William in Northern Ontario, Jayme in Southeastern BC, and Rachel in Central Ontario. Thanks for sharing your insights. We covered topics as CDP and data as a community building tool, challenges for overcoming local capacity, which is a recurring theme for us in data analysis capacity, and then the data surprises that we consistently come across, even for the smallest of communities. And Mike, thanks for taking the time to pull out some data on short notice. And thanks for those in the room. We're happy to answer your question afterwards if you wanted to reach out to any of us. I think you can figure out where to find us. Communitydata.ca is the home of the program. And we are a remotely delivered program, always have been. And hopefully we can see you in person next year. But until then, thanks finally to our host, Kyle. It was very much appreciated that you gave us this amount of time, and that worked really well for us. And hope we can do this again. So thanks all, and enjoy the rest of your day.